this was Rishi Sunak's deep plot in calling, the insanity of calling an election in the middle of a European Football Championship can only be explained by an attempt to export as many Scots as they could to Germany.
Yes. Well, it could also have been that they seem to have a bit of a predilection for gambling. Maybe they wanted to sort of put together their tips for the football along with when the election might be held.
Well, we can't talk about the unfortunate copper who's now subject to charges, but the two Tory candidates are not, and therefore are fair game.
Yes.
This is the kind of... I don't know what you call this, the insider dealing. I was surprised, actually, they got such modest odds on the idea of a June election.
Yes.
Because, what Prime Minister possibly calls an election where he's going to get hammered into the dust and have the worst Tory result for 200 years. So they should have got 50 to 1. I was also surprised that in Tory terms, I understand the bet was £100, which is, for a Tory, a mere bagatelle.
It's a small amount. It is a very small amount.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. Maybe every Tory candidate's been doing it to try and pay for the deposit in this election.
Well, it's very possible. John Swinney launched the SNP's manifesto yesterday. He got a bit of a hard time on ITV last night when he said that if they got a majority of seats in Scotland on this election, that they would then launch a referendum. He was told, no, you can't do that. You haven't got permission.
Well, that's the problem, of course. If you take away all this sort of verbiage or look at the fine print, as we are saying in the SNP manifesto, then when they say they're for independence, what they're actually for is to beg Sir Keir Starmer to give Scotland another referendum. Now, he's clearly not going to do that. He's too busy getting his protocols with Gary Neville, right back supports right winger. So he's not going to allow Scotland another referendum, and therefore the Alba say, look, and that's being the case, we've got to use an election to demonstrate majority support. But of course, if you use an election, then the independence parties have to unite and look for a majority of the vote. Not a majority of the seats, but a majority of the vote. And that gives you the popular mandate to make the moves towards independence and make Westminster bend to the will of the Scottish people.
Yes.
That's the strategy.
But of course, it may well be. Let's have a quick look at John Swinney yesterday.
At the heart of the manifesto is the SNP's pledges to the public in Scotland, which are to ensure that we address the issues of austerity and Brexit and the cost of living crisis, which is delivering such difficulty and hardship to households in Scotland, and by linking that to the issue of independence, which will give a solution to those challenges that people face in their everyday lives today.
Poor old John Swinney was asked last night on ITN how he was getting on without his battle bus, because he doesn't seem to have one anymore.
Well, I sympathise. Alba being a small party, we haven't put our bus on the road yet either. But Nicola Sturgeon was famous for her buses, which used to have all sorts of slogans painted on the side. The only thing that wasn't painted on the side was Independence for Scotland, which was what the SNP is meant to be about. But whether it's the John Swinney battle bus or the Nicola Sturgeon camper van or the Alba minibus, you can be absolutely certain that on the Alba minibus, independence will be splattered front and centre.
The problem, of course, as you know, Alex, and you and I have batted this one around for a while, is that if there were to be an independence referendum, part 2, there's no suggestion from the polls anyway that it would be any different from independence referendum part 1.
Well, it's interesting, Mike. I don't think it's independence support that's in trouble. I think independence support is in robust shape at about 50%. What's in trouble is SNP support, which is hovering around 30% now, which means that what has opened up and what is new in Scottish politics is a 20% gap between the support for independence on the one hand and support for the SNP on the other. And that, of course, is the gap into which Alba are driving. That's our catchment area, the people who are frustrated about the lack of action towards independence and are turning towards Alba. And you being an acute observer of Scottish opinion polls, Mike, will have seen the polls this week showing Alba gaining seats if this was a Scottish Parliament election.
Yes.
So, we're going to do well in this election, but the the signs are good for us, incredibly good for us in 2 years' time at the Scottish elections.
But like reform, you're perhaps putting a bridgehead out there, but also like reform, you're struggling to get onto the sort of debating platforms that you feel you should be on. Is there a need to look at who is allowed to debate with whom in the way that the rules are done now?
Desperate need. If you take Nigel Farage, I've got little in common with George Galloway, who I disagree on so many things about. But we have one thing in common, that by and large, the former are now getting on to the media big style. But the Workers' Party are being excluded, Alba are being excluded, despite the fact there are two MPs in the last parliament. It's just simply unfair to have an establishment target. Now, I would exempt Talk TV and also Times Radio, who've been, I think, very fair in their coverage through the election. But if you're talking about ITV and the BBC, it's a cabal, it's a carver. It's designed to have the established parties talking to each other, which would be fine, of course, if there was any great difference in their manifestos. But as constantly has been illustrated, there is very little difference between the Tory and Labour parties and the Liberal parties. And therefore, we should have voices able to debate. I think we often feel that the reason that they keep us off the debates is they're frightened of what's going to happen to Starmer and Sunak and Mr Swinney if we were allowed on to give them a piece of our mind.
Yes, well, John Swinney's going to be taking part in the question time debate tonight, and when you look at the whole sort of setup of it, it doesn't really make any sense to me.
No, and that's why we need. In my view, the key thing to judge an election debate on should be the number of candidates that a party is fielding, because everybody should start in a race, from roughly an equal point at the starting gate, and then you see where they finish up. But what they're doing in terms of debates, because especially when it's a surprise or shock election with a limited amount for street campaigning, what they're doing basically is conducting a campaign by television and then making sure that voices, which for one reason or another the establishment doesn't approve of, are kept off the air. Now, that's not democracy. That's not an election. That's not a reasonable way to behave. And I don't blame, incidentally, individual journalists and broadcasters, because I know how frustrated they are that they don't get the whole variety and spectrum of points of view. I mean, there was the sole debate, I think, we've got on to in the BBC Scotland last night, which they helpfully placed at 1:30 in the morning. I think it was broadcast in BBC One because of the football schedules.
Yeah.
And Kenny McCaskill for Alba was on it, my deputy leader. And it was a much better debate because there was somebody on that panel who was taking a distinct and opposite point of view from the other panelists. It makes a much better, more interesting, lively and entertaining debate. So I think individual broadcasters are frustrated perhaps not as frustrated as I am, because I'm pretty angry about it, but they're frustrated as well that the people are not being given the full range and spectrum of choices that they should be.
No, I think there's a lot to be looked at in that whole area. Just go back to the football before I let you go. So it's Hungary, with whom you have the fate of Scotland in your hands. Are you going to be going over for that?
Well, I'm just back, of course, from the Germany game. I was going to stay for the duration, but that idiot Sunak put the kibosh on that. But what I can tell you, Mike, is I was campaigning in East Lothian with George Canavan yesterday, and that's the home of the saltire. Astleton Ford, your Scottish history, but a saltire appeared in the sky and encouraged the Scottish Army. A saltire appeared in the sky, which I took as a portent either of great things and politically for Alba or alternatively of a good result for Scotland, which happened. Now, outside Gleneagles Hotel, I've just seen a Great Dane dog.
Have you?
What is that? An indication of things to come. But if you take care of Denmark, we'll take care of Hungary.
Absolutely right. And somebody said to me this morning, Alex is looking a bit emotional. And I said, well, naturally he's emotional. There's a lot at stake, and it's only 2 weeks to go.
Is it a surprise I'm looking emotional? This is a euphemism for tired and emotional.
Not at all.
The morning after the night celebrating a Scotland draw in the European Championships. And a great game, incidentally. And well done to Mr Clark and the team for picking themselves up off the floor and giving such a good account of themselves last night.